Hey, this week on the BattleCry, you should check out stopice.net. If you don't know what that is, I'm going to tell you all about it. We're going to go deep dive into Minneapolis. You don't want to miss that. Watch the BattleCry. Hey everyone, Mark Meckler here. Welcome to the Sunday Night BattleCry. The big question tonight is Mark growing a beard or is he just too lazy to shave? Maybe more on that later. Maybe we'll get an answer. Actually, the real reason that I look like I look, and yeah, you don't have to tell me. You guys are so mean. You sometimes email me or text me and tell me how bad that I look on the BattleCry. I do look bad. Look at that. That's like at least probably a 5-day shadow. I look like I haven't slept that much because I haven't. Why? Because I did 18 hours of driving yesterday. Why would I do 18 hours of driving? Because Odin. Now, a lot of you guys have met Odin. Odin is the third Great Dane in the house. You might notice right now, there's no Odin. Odin is gone. Odin went bye-bye. The reason Odin went bye-bye is because Odin belongs to my son, Jacob. And so yesterday was part of the big transit to take Odin home. My son now lives up in New Jersey. And I've been watching Odin for a while as he made that transition. So I actually drove to Van Buren, Arkansas yesterday. Yep. Got up at 6 a.m. Didn't get home until midnight. And I did that to take Odin to meet Jacob's in-laws who drove down from Missouri, picked him up. Odin's now in Missouri for the day. He's safe, sound, happy. And he's with his little sister Maple for the night there. And then they will drive up to Virginia. Jacob will drive down and pick up Odin. Probably more detail than you need, but everybody will be happily united. And some people say, why would you do that? That sounds crazy. And the answer is nothing I wouldn't do for my kids. I know you feel the same way. So I did that for Jacob and his beautiful wife, Nick. I will take care of Jacob and Nicole however I have to. Also, pretty much nothing I wouldn't do for the dogs. So you won't see Odin around here anymore, at least for a while. And but we still do have Doc and Winston, so it's going to be okay. There's enough Danes in the house. Still about 300 pounds worth of Danes. I think that's enough. All right, so this week, as always, we're going to tell you something that we think you should do, right? Because we're about action. We're not just about sitting around and listening and yelling at the TV or the computer. So this week, I want to encourage you to be a leader. Now, when people tell you to be a leader, they usually mean to go out and do something like start an organization or lead a group or step up to lead something in your church. I don't mean that. What I mean is I want you to take on one of the characteristics of great leaders. When I look at great leaders, one of the things that I see that all great leaders have is a measure of discretion. Like you have to know when to speak and when not to speak. Not just when, but how to speak. Sometimes how you talk about things matters more than exactly what you're talking about. Are you saying things in a way that's compelling, that's winsome, that makes you sound like a happy warrior? Are you speaking to the right audience in the right tone? Because you can say the same thing to two different audiences. You need to say it two different ways if you want to be heard. And I think leaders always use that kind of discretion. They're very thoughtful about the words that come out of their mouth. And I want to go into our first subject this week, which is the continuing unrest in Minneapolis. And I want to talk about a couple of leaders. And by the way, I want to be cautious here. I admire these leaders, so I want to put that caveat up front. But I think they weren't cautious. They didn't use discretion in the way they spoke in the last week. And this is a conversation or statements that took place around the unfortunate shooting of Preddy, who got shot when he was scuffling with officers. Now, we've talked about this a little bit before. I think that was a justifiable shooting based on the totality of the circumstances. I still think it was very unfortunate. What I think was absolutely incorrect, or it was how Kristi Noem spoke about it, and was how Bovino spoke about it, who was the commander of the Border Patrol. Both of them attempted to frame Preddy in the most extreme terms possible. They called him a domestic terrorist. They said that Bovino said he was there to do maximum harm, that he intended to kill a bunch of federal law enforcement officers. Kristi Noem, not quite the same, but close to that. I think she called him a domestic terrorist. And it turned out, based on what we now know, that neither of those things were correct. And so these are leaders who spoke into a heated moment and, in my opinion, did not exercise the correct amount of discretion. So what happened out of that is that President Trump, as the decisive leader he is, understood that that moment had been mishandled, and he brought in new leadership. So he relieved Bovino of his command. He brought in Tom Homan, who, in my opinion, and I know him personally, is the ultimate professional, the ultimate leader with discretion. And Homan came in on the ground, took over the situation, met with the mayor, met with the governor. And if you listen to him talk about that situation, he sounds like a law enforcement officer. He doesn't sound like he's trying to score points. He doesn't sound like he's trying to be inflammatory. What he said is, we will do a full and complete investigation, a full federal level law enforcement investigation, and we will let the chips fall where they may. In other words, he sounds like law enforcement. This is what law enforcement should sound like. By the way, it's not as satisfying. It's much more satisfying to go out there and spout inflammatory stuff. It appeals to our baser nature. All of us have that base nature, but it's much more effective. And it is a leader showing discretion in how they speak. And so what I want you to do is be a leader in your own life, in your family, at work, at church, wherever you are. And the part of leadership that I want you to focus on right now is this idea of using your discretion. You don't have to speak about everything. You don't have to speak out on everything. You don't have to have an opinion on everything. And if you're going to express an opinion, express that opinion in measured terms. One big caveat to all of this: sometimes being inflammatory is intentional and it's needed and it accomplishes something in a particular circumstance. If what you're trying to do is draw attention to something that you think is very important, there isn't enough tension on it, then sometimes being inflammatory is the right thing to do if you're using discretion. I'm just telling you to think about how you talk about things. You know, my parents used to tell me, engage your brain before you engage your mouth. Younger people, little kids, engage their mouth first, brain later. Teenagers, well, sometimes they engage their brain for the wrong reason. They think about how they're going to lie about something. But you really want to think about what you're saying and how you're saying it before you do it. So be a leader, use your discretion. And in Minneapolis, I think we saw some good examples of leadership that did not do that. Now, in Minneapolis, the chaos continues, but it seems to be toning down. And I think part of that is Trump's realignment of how he's approaching it. Trump is a master at PR. He doesn't like it when the PR is going bad, and he knows how to adapt to make the PR go better. I think he's doing what they should have done all along, which is the entire narrative should be what Homan's saying is, all this stuff goes away if the jails will just cooperate with us. What we're trying to do is arrest people by issuing detainers to the local jails for illegal immigrants that are committing crimes in the U.S. And if you'll just turn them over to us, then we don't need to be out on the streets doing this. And by the way, that just has the added benefit of being completely true. How do we know it's true? What's going on in Denver, or what's going on in Austin, where I live, or what's going on in other blue cities? Memphis is another one where there are actually more ICE arrests taking place in those cities. No chaos. No chaos, because generally speaking, in most of the blue cities, even, you've got local jails cooperating with federal law enforcement. They're not, I want to be clear, being asked to enforce federal law. They're simply being asked to turn over people when ICE issues detainers on them. They're not being asked to prosecute people for immigration violations. They're not being asked to go arrest people for immigration violations. Those are federal law enforcement functions. All they're being asked is, if you arrest somebody on a criminal charge and it turns out that they are an illegal alien, let us know and we'll issue a detainer and you just hold them for us until we can come get them. Not unreasonable. That's Trump's position now. I think that's starting to calm things down in Minneapolis. Now, the other thing that is calming things down in Minneapolis is, have you ever heard of stopice.net? Probably not. You probably haven't been to that website. Probably don't need to go to that website. But if you look on X, what you'll find out is that website is one of the core websites where the insurgency is being organized, where all these citizen patrols, quote unquote, are being organized, where all the doxing of ICE agents is being organized, where all the license plates of ICE and Border Patrol agents are being run, where all the following and the intrusion and the interruption with federal law enforcement is being coordinated through this website. It looks like the Attorney General is involved in this. The Attorney General of Minnesota. Looks like the Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota is involved in this. Looks like local state reps and city members, city council members are involved in this. Their names are being found. Well, there is a group called Back the Blue has now deeply infiltrated that stuff. They not only have they infiltrated, but they've hacked it. And it's absolutely incredible. If you look at the website, it says now on the front of that website that they have infiltrated the website and they've turned all your names and phone numbers over to federal law enforcement officials. In other words, what's going on is there is a counterinsurgency to the federal government being organized by really anti-American people on the ground. I think some of it's coming from outside of the country. I think we'll find some of it's funded from outside the country. So all that's going on, but now there is a counterinsurgency of technically proficient people, some who are former law enforcement, some who are special forces, some who are forensic investigators, some who are computer engineers, computer programmers, and they've gone in and they've hacked this stuff. And they're inside these networks. You've probably seen Cam Higbee talking about it and others. And now they're turning that information over to federal law enforcement. What's happening is that's causing these networks to collapse. And we need to see more of this. These folks who are doing the doxing are being doxed. In other words, their personal information is being revealed. They're not happy about it, but it's causing this insurgency to collapse. I say we need more of this. We need it harder and we need it faster. I love that. These are citizens stepping up to defend ICE and to defend federal law enforcement. So what you're seeing here, and I think this is really concerning, and you should be concerned about this, is you're actually seeing an insurgency against the United States government. It's not just in Minneapolis, though Minneapolis is ground zero. I think it was done in Minneapolis to cover up the money laundering operation, the billions of dollars being stolen from the federal government, and then I believe funded back into Democrat elections to make sure Democrats are elected and run the state. I'm going to be really curious to see what happens in Minneapolis's elections and in Minnesota's elections over the next few cycles if this funding spigot gets cut off like it looks like it's being cut off. But it's not just Minneapolis. It's Denver. It's Los Angeles. Seattle's mayor is the current mayor comes out of the protest movement. And she has now said that the Seattle Police Department, she's going to empower them to do exactly what this insurgent movement is doing. In other words, to track federal law enforcement officers and to provide people with that information. It's outrageous. And if you look as an insurgent movement where the insurgents are in control, it's a pretty dangerous situation for the United States. What do I mean by that? Well, if you were a special forces operator, if you were somebody who looks at the battlefield of any potential battlefield, one of the things you want to look at in a country is where are the deep water ports? Where can you move troops in and out of? Where can you move supplies in and out of? And if you look at the United States and you look at the deep water port cities, you look at San Francisco, you look at Seattle, you look at Philadelphia, you look at Boston, you look at, where else would we look? Most of the big ports around the country, Los Angeles, they're all run by leftists. They're run by anti-American leftists. Let's just be straight about that. Houston, another deep water port, again, has been run by leftists, unfortunately, here in Texas. And I think this is a dangerous situation for America. What we're seeing is a lot of the critical infrastructure. In the case of an insurgency against an entire country, these deep water ports are critical infrastructure, are now being run by leftists who, frankly, are more favorable to foreign interests than they are to U.S. interests. I believe there's actually, the ground is being prepared for a national insurgency. And when I say that, I want to be really clear. I don't mean like tomorrow. These are the kinds of things, if you understand how this unconventional warfare works, how UW works, it takes years and years and years, sometimes decades, to prepare the ground for this kind of insurgency. And it looks to me like the left has been doing this in America for a very long time, and we need to wake up. I say this often, you need to know what time it is. This is what time it is in America. If you want to know kind of how this comes down, you should read Kurt Schlichter's book, The Second American Revolution. It's very realistic. It's really terrifying. Kurt's not hoping this stuff happens. He's warning against it. I know Kurt. He's a great guy. He's a great author. Read The Second American Revolution by Kurt Schlichter. All right, speaking of things that are anti-American and crazy, is Candace Owens, kind of top of the list. And Candace Owens, anti-American, anti-Jew, anti-Israel, anti-sanity. Seems like she's becoming increasingly irrelevant. And I love that. Thank God that's happening. Daily Wire is an incredible parody account based on her old social media accounts at Daily Wire, which they still own, which is hilarious to me and ironic. And they're doing things like showing all the words that Candace Owens can't pronounce. And it's almost like she's not that smart. Why? Because she's not that smart. In fact, I think she's pretty dumb. And I think she's incredibly nefarious. I think she's a bad actor. Remember when she said she wasn't attacking Erica Kirk? Well, now she claims she's going to make a documentary expose on Erica Kirk. Now she's back to openly claiming Erica Kirk had something to do with Charlie Kirk's murder. Yeah, this is bad stuff. It's evil stuff. To those of you that were following her, I hope you figured it out. By the way, in the last week, she said she was pointing out possible weather manipulation because it was 30 degrees in Nashville where she lives and the ice wasn't melting. 30 degrees, right? Below freezing. And Candace was very suspicious because the ice wasn't melting. Right? Not smart, crazy. I hope none of you guys are listening to her anymore. You notice I'm talking about her less and less. That's because she's less and less relevant. And I just want to say, thank you, Lord. I appreciate that she's less and less relevant. All right, what's going on in Iran right now? It's a little bit quiet on the international front, which is weird. Trump has moved an entire flotilla led by an aircraft carrier, an entire carrier group into the area within striking distance. Is he going to strike? Is he sending a message? What's the message? I don't think the mullahs are going to step down. I think they would take slaughter versus stepping down. They have essentially quelled the protests, as far as I can tell. That's what happens when you go out with machine guns and gun tens of thousands of people down in the streets. The protests kind of go away. They don't have any weaponry. They don't have a way to fight back, the protesters. And so now what you've got is a situation on the ground. I don't think I could use the word stabilized, but it seems like the giant protests have gone away because tens of thousands of people have been mowed down in the streets. I don't know what Trump's going to do at this point. I think it's a really bad situation. I think Trump came out and said point blank, keep protesting and I've got your back. And they kept protesting and they died. And it doesn't appear that anything's happened. Right now, it doesn't look like he necessarily had their back. Now, I say this very often. I trust Trump. I'm willing to let him keep cooking, as the saying goes. I don't know what he's going to do in Iran. He's been incredibly good on foreign policy for the most part, in my opinion. Some things I don't agree with, but I'm going to say 90% of things I agree with. He's probably even right on the 10% I don't agree. But in any event, I'm going to let him keep cooking. I just hope he does something. I think America needs to act. I think when Trump says he was going to do something to help those people, if he doesn't do it, he looks like Obama, who drew the red line in the sand in Syria against Bashar Assad and his use of chemical weapons. And then Assad used chemical weapons and Obama did nothing. And I'm just hoping that Trump doesn't do that same thing. He doesn't seem like that kind of a guy to me. Seems like he's good to his word, but it's funky right now. All right, in more positive news here on the domestic front, this week it was announced Trump accounts. Now, Trump accounts are where the government is going to put $1,000 in any newborn's account, and this is a private savings account, and they then can invest them in the markets. And there are ways for companies to contribute to that. There are ways for parents to contribute to that, families to contribute to that, employers to contribute to that. The point is to help young Americans, and this is important on the affordability crisis, to help young Americans between 0 and 18 to build some wealth. Now, this is not just about money, by the way. I think this is really important to understand. This is also about capitalism per se. What I mean by that is I heard one of the people who helped design this program, a business person, say people are either going to fall for capitalism and love capitalism, or they're going to fall for the state and love the state. And that means they're going to be communists. And so what this does is allows a lot of young people, literally millions and millions of young people, I think it's up to 25 million young people, to have accounts that are invested in the markets, which means they're invested in capitalism. And I think this is incredibly important and exciting. I think there are going to be hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of wealth generated out of this. $1,000 invested right now by the government, and then parents putting in the maximum every year. It's estimated by the time a kid is 28 years old, his account will be worth over $1 million. Now, of course, with inflation, $1 million won't be $1 million 28 years from now, but it'll be a chunk of money, and the kids can use it for college when they're 18. They can use it to buy a house. They can use it to start a business. All kinds of stuff can be done with that money. I just think this is great politics and great policy, and I think it's great policy philosophically as well as politically and economically. I love it. I'm super excited about that. All right. Last week, by the way, we passed the South Dakota Senate. I hope you guys caught that. It was a huge vote. We came out of committee 8-1. We blew out of the Senate in overwhelming fashion. And now we're over to the House. I don't know exactly the timing on the House committee and the House vote, but I think things look close there in South Dakota. I don't want to say we got it in the bag. If you're in South Dakota, make sure you contact your member of the House of Representatives and tell them to vote for Convention of States. All right, a couple of things we want to do before we wrap up, before we go to questions. Remember to like the video, hit subscribe, ring the notification bell, sign the open letter to Trump. We still want Trump to pay more attention to Convention of States. So go to conventionofstates.com/Trump. And also, if you made a resolution for 2026, maybe you stopped already. Most people have stopped by now. Here's when you shouldn't stop, and that is to end federal overreach. How can you do that? You can help us to pass the Convention of States resolution in the 14 remaining states where it's necessary. If you're willing to support us, you can donate to us. Go to conventionofstates.com/end26, conventionofstates.com/end26 to end federal overreach. Your gift right now would be doubled for maximum impact. We need your help. All the Soros orgs are coming after us, even a couple of crazy people on the right. Secure passage of Convention of States in the 14 states where it still needs to pass. Go to conventionofstates.com/end26. All right, now it's time for my favorite part. Ask Mark anything. You get to ask me the questions I have to answer. Angel Cushing says, is there a common denominator between anti-Semites and opponents of COS? Interesting question. Well, for those of you who don't know, I'm a Jewish Christian. I do get a bunch of anti-Semitism online because I'm Jewish. So, and I lead Convention of States. So that seems to be a common denominator. I'm not sure there's any other well, here's the common denominator. Like this is actually, Angel, I should have said this first. They're stupid. They're ignorant. Really, if you're an anti-Semite, you're stupid and you're ignorant. If you're against COS at this point and you're a conservative and you like limited government, then at this point, frankly, it's been going on so long, unless you just came to the party, then you're stupid and ignorant. If you have just come to the party and just learning about it and you're skeptical, that doesn't make you stupid and ignorant. Go to conventionofstates.com, click on the resources tab, learn about it. You'll be in favor of it because you're a smart person. Barry Newman asks, would an amendment proposal changing the word persons to citizens in Section 2 of the 14th Amendment be germane to our Article 5 resolution? And I think the answer is absolutely. In other words, that limits the federal government's power to define who we're talking about when we're talking about birthright citizenship. And so citizens is the correct operative term. And yes, we could do that. That's really smart, Barry. I love it. Barry's always has smart questions and great suggestions. Thanks, Barry. I appreciate you. One of our top grassroots activists in the country. Love you, Barry. Love all of you grassroots activists. You are incredible. Don't forget the battle cry. Be a leader. Use your discretion. Love you guys. We'll see you next week on the battle cry.